Okay. All right. Hello, hello, and welcome to the January Book Troop show where I have my lovely
Yay.
friends Jordan and Elizabeth, who we have all read Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. This was
We
our
did.
pick this month. Ooh, look at that. I tried to make the background like pink and yellow to like
I
match the
know. I
vibes.
love the colors.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, today we are here. We also just happen to have January birthdays, all three of us. Elizabeth, which day was yours again? Remind me.
Mine was the 15th.
Okay, yeah, so she's on the 15th, I'm on the 18th, and then Jordan's on the 28th tomorrow. So, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, happy early birthday and happy
January
belated birthday.
babies.
Right? Yeah, so very exciting. I saw Elizabeth, were you in New York for your birthday?
I was. I
That was
was.
That's
so sick.
amazing.
That
Oh, I
was
love
so
New
cool.
York.
Yeah, how was it? Was it your first time there or you've been before?
Oh no, I've been many times.
Okay.
My husband proposed to me in New York, so it's
Oh
kind of
my
a
Oh,
god.
spot. And yeah, we did stuff that we haven't done before this time. We went. I've never been to the Statue of Liberty,
Oh
and
wow.
we didn't go to Ellis Island, but we took the ferry. And as we were on the ferry, it started snowing, and it was really magical. We went up top, and it was so windy, like we could not even like
Oh
speak to each other.
wow.
Like this magical moment with the like Statue of Liberty in the back. Oh my gosh, it was so amazing. I was sick
Wow.
too, but I am feeling better now. So
Oh good.
nice. New
Good.
York City in the winter is a whole different vibe than in the
It's
summer.
brutal.
'Cause
Yeah.
yeah,
Definitely. So, Jordan, do you have any birthday plans for this weekend or tomorrow?
nothing too exciting. So I live about 8 hours away from my parents. So they
Okay.
came up and are staying with us.
Oh, nice.
And so I'm just going to spend it with family. I have some extended family in the area that we'll have over tomorrow.
Nice.
Watch the Taylor Swift game on football tomorrow,
There
and
you go.
and
Sounds like
that's
a good
about it.
time.
I'm turning 29, so it feels like a very anticlimactic birthday. So
oh,
Yeah.
pretty
I
low
feel that I
key.
just turned 29 too. We're
Yeah,
like we're almost like like
I
twins.
know
So
that's
oh
crazy.
gosh, I love
I know
that.
and my sister's birthday is actually today.
Oh yeah, it
She's
is.
celebrating in Seattle with her boyfriend. So she's an Aquarius too, but she's also a January baby. I feel like the older I get, the more that I meet January babies, you know?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
growing up, I didn't know too many, but now I'm always like, "Oh my god, like it's so cool." So yeah, we did have or I did. I don't know if you guys do. I brought a drink. And so
Yep.
if you decided to bring drinks to like cheers with us, let us know what you're drinking. I'm drinking this is one of my favorite Moscatos. It's like it's not actually blue, but it's like in this blue bottle and it's so good. Oh my gosh. It's very sweet and like it's not too strong of alcohol, but it's one of my favorites. But what are you guys drinking if you're drinking anything?
I've got wine as well. I'm not normally a
Ooh,
red wine drinker, but this is what I had, so it's
oh
just a
nice.
red blend.
Nice.
I love a red wine. I'm drinking an old fashioned.
Fancy.
Ooh.
Fashioned, and I made myself a backup in case I run out.
Very fancy.
I'm prepared. I'm ready.
Yeah, you came ready. I love it.
But Gabby, what did you do for your birthday?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so on my actual birthday, I got snowed in, which was just fucking cool. I was pretty upset about it, not gonna lie, on the day of my birthday because I wanted to go out and like do all these things and go to bookstores, but like the bookstores were closed. The restaurant that I had reservations at was closed from snow, and it was just like But it ended up being a really good birthday because my dad was able to come in his truck and we went to like the only restaurant that was open in town, and we still had a good night. And then my birthday weekend, I got to go down to Seattle with one of my friends, so it ended up being a really good birthday. But that morning, I was like, what the heck? I was so mad about being snowed in.
The
Oh,
weather has
So
been rough this
I
month,
know.
pretty
I'm like
much
the winter
everywhere.
babies. Like we experience this all the time where birthday plans just get canceled because of the weather.
Yeah,
So
no kidding.
so yeah. But yeah, it ended up being a good time. So yeah, thank you all to everybody who's already joining us. I see so many in the chat wishing us happy birthday, which is very kind. So thank you so much for all of that love. And yeah, this month we have read and we're gonna be discussing Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. First, I know we kind of introduced ourselves, but if you want to kind of talk about like your channel and like what you do over there, I would love that. I do have both of them linked down below, by the way, if you're not familiar with your channels. But do you want to just kind of talk about like what kind of books you typically read and what kind of videos you typically do and that kind of thing? Jordan, you can start.
Sure. I'm Jordan. My channel is Sorry Booked Solid. I read a variety of genres, but I mostly stay in the realistic fiction realm. So most things other than fantasy and even horror, I don't read much of. But
Mhm.
I love the spectrum of other genres. On my channel, I do a lot of reading vlogs, and I've recently been getting into like recurring reading vlog series where I read like my book of the month books every couple of months,
I
or
love those
NetGalley
videos.
arcs.
Yeah.
NetGalley arcs every few months when I have those. So I've really been enjoying that to kind of keep up with new releases. And yeah.
Nice. I love those book of the month vlogs, by the way, because I'm a huge like book of the month girl. So I love to like see your thoughts on the book of the month releases as they come out.
Yeah, I
It's
love
exciting.
doing them. And it helps me stay on top of my book of the month books as I get
Yeah,
them, which I
I'm
really
sure.
appreciate because they can pile up really quickly.
Smart.
Mhm.
Nice.
I'm Elizabeth. My channel is Reading Riley. And I read mostly horror and thriller and kind of feminist type stuff. I feel like I'm in the midst of like a taste change because
Yeah.
I've been reading more stuff that can veer towards literary lately, which was never really my thing. But I'm obsessed with psychology, and I'm obsessed with the human mind and how it works. And I love digging into these terrible people and trying to figure out why, like what makes them tick. Like that's my obsession in life, pretty much.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out people in general.
I love that.
Yeah, I always do a wrap up, and then I try to do, and then I have my own book club as well, the Midnight Society book club, where we read thriller, horror, and feminist fiction. This month we're reading Monstrilio.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and
That's exciting.
yeah.
I was gonna say, if you don't plug your book club, I'll plug your book club. So like, she has a really awesome book club, and I feel like we always have a lot of crossover in reading tastes. So it's cool. I always get excited to see what you're gonna be reading for your book club. And Monstrilio was one of my favorites of last year, so I can't wait to see what everyone thinks of that one. But yeah, so very exciting. Yeah, I'll have both of their channels linked down below if you want to go and check them out. They both read pretty similarly taste to me, I think, most of the time. Like anytime I watch both of your videos, I'm always like, yep, crossover same. So that's really awesome. But yeah, so this month we read Bright Young Women. This one is, I would describe it as more of like a literary fiction style writing, mystery thriller type of story. And this one was actually inspired by the real life Ted Bundy case situation. It's inspired by the real life sorority that was targeted by Ted Bundy. Would one of you want to give kind of like a spoiler-free synopsis, perhaps, for anybody who's here who hasn't read it yet? We are going to be holding off on spoilers for a little bit here at the beginning, and we will be warning you well before we jump into spoilers. But just if there's anybody who hasn't read it yet, maybe we can do a synopsis, and then maybe if you want to put a yellow heart in the chat if you did read along with us this month, and then maybe a pink heart if you did not, just so I can get an idea for who's all here because they've read it. And yeah, as far as
take it, Elizabeth,
yeah, like,
or you want me to?
I can. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I didn't plan anything, but let me. So where do we start with this one?
I know it's kind of a lot.
As you said, it's based off of Ted Bundy's crimes, which the author specifically does not say his name throughout. It is a fictionalized true crime story, similar to like the Truman Capote. From what I understand, I haven't read that one yet. What's that one called?
No idea.
It's like a famous fictionalized true crime case that I have not read and I need to.
I'm not sure.
I'll have to think on that one. But anyway, so it's essentially following a fictionalized version of these women who are in a sorority at Florida State. And we're following two different main point of views throughout. One of them, and they're both connected by another character. I'm doing a terrible job of it.
No, you're doing great.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. Well, if you know much about Ted Bundy's crimes, you know that like one of his later crimes was at a sorority house at Florida State where he broke in and assaulted the women in there, killed two. I'm not sure if that's exactly. I didn't fact check. What's
me neither. And yeah, we'll talk about this. Yeah, I'm guessing more about the relation to the real life. But yeah, it's a
beautiful feminist story, and it's told in a really interesting way. And it's just yeah, I don't know how else to describe this. If you guys want to add anything into that, feel free. I will not be offended because I know that was kind of all over the place.
Yeah, just the one perspective that we get is Pamela. She was the president of the sorority, and she was a survivor of what happened.
Yes.
And then the other perspective we get is another woman named Ruth, who was a victim, not in the sorority murder, but in a different
Yeah, it's like
murder,
4
her
years in the
murder.
past.
Yeah,
Like
so
their
we
chapters are
get
in the past.
so we get varying timelines with both of those women, and also mentions of many other women that
Mhm.
came into contact with him. And then it's also covering like the solving of
Mhm.
who he was and finding him, tracking him down, all of that. So it covers a lot.
Yeah, it does.
It's pretty complex, I thought.
Mhm, mhm.
100%.
Okay. I think that was a good description. I think we should just jump in right into ratings because I'm just very curious to see how you two felt about this one because I'm not entirely sure. But mostly from the group chat, that I have on Discord and everything, it seems like people either really loved this one or really struggled through it. I saw a lot of people saying that it was either like really slow or too slow for them, or people were uncomfortable by the fact that this was a real life situation that was kind of like fictional.
Mhm.
And so I'm just curious to see how you guys ended up feeling about it. It just seems like there was a lot of mixed feelings in the chat with this one. So, and then while we're talking about our ratings, if everybody would that read along with us this month wants to go ahead and throw their ratings in the chat, so we can kind of see where everybody's feelings are towards this book. But yeah, do you want to kick us off, Jordan?
Yeah, so this is kind of out of my comfort zone. I'm not someone who reads true crime. I
Mhm,
really don't have interest um, in that. So I hadn't read this book before picking it for this.
mhm.
And once we picked it, I had already known, like I knew what it was inspired by. So I kind of knew what to expect.
Yeah.
So in reading it, I think I read it a little bit less for enjoyment and more like I was studying it almost. So like I tabbed it up, I
Oh wow.
highlighted it. So through that lens, I did end up really appreciating it and enjoying it. So I haven't officially rated it on Goodreads yet, but it probably will land around 4 stars because I think
Nice.
it did what it set out to do. And as
Mhm.
someone fairly new to this conversation, I feel like I learned a lot and took a lot out of it. So probably
Nice.
about a 4 stars for me
Yeah.
for now.
Mhm.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Okay, well, for me, a little bit of backstory for y'all if you don't know. I am kind of a true crime obsessed person.
Mhm.
Love true crime podcasts. I actually like books. I have not read that many true crime books, but I know a lot about true crime from podcasts and other media. And I know a little bit about Ted Bundy, but I don't know what I was expecting going into this. Um, but I kind of understand the mixed reviews because of the small, I wouldn't say small, but the ethical dilemma of this, let's just say.
Right.
But so I had to give it a little bit off for that because of the slight discomfort. But I'm giving this 4.5 stars. I loved it for
Nice.
what it is. That's on the page. I had a blast. I thought it was.
Mhm. Awesome. That's so great to hear. I'm always happy to hear when people enjoy the, like the book that I asked you to read for the book club.
Oh,
So
no. Gabby,
that
why do I
makes
feel
me
like you're
Yeah,
about
this
to?
feels like a little preamble to differing.
You're like,
you
I
know,
gave it 1 star.
you would think, right? Because I am known to have this track record with my book club where I just don't like anything that I read for my book club. But I'm very happy to say that this was 5 stars for me. Like this was
Okay.
maybe the most successful book club pick I think that I've ever had. Like I loved this. Like this is probably going to be in my top 10 of this year. Like I
Hmm.
freaking
Amazing.
yeah, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, like to read a new all-time favorite book for the book club. I'm like, how freaking special because this hasn't really happened for me yet.
Oh, I love
Um,
I
that.
love
so I
that.
know I'm so happy about it. I agree with everything that you guys said. I mean, I know like I do feel like a little bit uncomfortable by the fact that this is a real life situation, but just critiquing like the book as its own fictional thing that's separate from the real life stuff, I just thought it was so freaking powerful. Like there are so many quotes I could pull from this text that just like really, really move me. And I'm just like, say it fucking louder, bitch. Like it was
Yeah.
just so powerful and moving. And I was brought to tears several times while I was reading this. I just really emotionally connected to these characters. And I thought it was done in such a, sensitive way. And I just really enjoy stories like this where, it touches on how like harmful it is, the language that we use to talk about serial killers who are just fucking awful. And,
Yeah.
how the women have to deal with these men in society being glamorized in this way. I think it's also really interesting the fact that last month for the book troop, we ended up reading Notes on an Execution, which actually has a lot of crossover with this
Yeah.
book, or like the
Totally.
conversations might feel a little bit similar because of the themes of the books actually ended up being really similar. But I don't even know if I can say, but this might like I don't even know if this hit me harder than Notes on an Execution. Like they're definitely like neck and neck for me. So like that's really crazy.
That
Because
is.
yeah, because Notes on an Execution was like one of my top favorites of the year when I read it. So
Yeah.
really wild
And
how hard this book hit for me, and I feel really great about it.
That's amazing. And speaking
Yes.
of like the way we talk about these horrible men, I saw someone ask about why it's called Bright Young
Mhm.
Women in the comments, so I thought we could answer
Yes.
that quickly because I know that that's a direct play on how Ted Bundy was described as a bright
Yes.
young man who
Mhm.
just like made a bad choice. And
Mhm.
so this is like,
Yeah.
yeah, kind
I
of
love that this is the author just, like,
denouncing that
reclaiming
and
it. Yeah.
saying,
Yeah.
no, the brave ones are the women, and the ones we should be
Mhm.
talking about are
Mhm.
the women.
Yeah.
Specifically, the judge that tried his case is
Yeah.
Yeah.
said that to him, like,
Yeah.
"Hey, you're a very bright young man. I don't know why where you took the wrong road. You took the
Yeah.
wrong path." And so he's clearly just not even, like, thinking about the victims. He's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this guy could have been great. He made some bad
Yeah.
decisions, but you're a bright young man. It's too bad for you."
Yeah,
Like,
and the language he used to him when he said, like, you were on a good path, partner," and just, like, all this friendly language he was using to him, being like, "Oh,
yeah,
like, you could have practiced court with me, and I would have
Yeah.
loved to have that. I don't have any animosity towards you." Like, the language he actually used was so fucking horrific to, like, look back on that. Like, we just treat him like, "Oh, he just did a bad thing, like, slap on the wrist," but, like,
mhm.
no.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah, I
that's
really, yeah,
oh, sorry.
appreciate the title.
Mhm.
The title of the book was like a huge thing to like reclaim that and be like,
Mhm.
no, actually he was a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Um so before we do jump into talking about this book, I was just curious if you have read any books from this author before, and if so, like how this one compared. Because I personally have not actually read any books from this author, and now I'm definitely obviously interested in doing that. But I had heard a little bit about Luckiest Girl Alive. I'd seen the movie, but I had not actually read the book. So I was just curious
Okay.
if you were familiar with her work before this or not.
Yeah, for me, no, I haven't read either of them, and I haven't seen the movie adaptation, and I don't
Mhm.
really know anything about them. So I don't know, are they, and maybe in the comments, I don't know, Elizabeth, if you've read them, but are they similar in how they like tackle these themes or based on true events or anything like that? Or is this kind
Yeah.
of a deviation for her? I'd be curious.
I actually have not read anything else by her either, so I don't
Okay.
know. I did um was listening to an interview, or maybe it was in the back of the audiobook or something, where it mentioned her other book, Luckiest Girl Alive, and the fact that that had a feminist angle as well in there, but I can't
Mm,
remember specifically what it was. It was a different angle. So I get that that could be like an underlying um like
Theme for her.
theme,
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah.
in her books. But yeah, I was not interested in Luckiest Girl Alive prior to reading this, and
Yeah.
now I'm like, okay, maybe I need to check that out.
Yeah, I wasn't super interested in reading Luckiest Girl Alive either, just from what I had heard about it. Like, I really thought it was more of like a popcorn thriller, like, your typical kind of run of the mill
Hmm.
stuff. So I wasn't really interested in it, but I'd be curious to hear what people say in comparison to her other books because I do feel like this one might be quite different from Luckiest Girl Alive is like the general vibe that I get when I hear people talking about Luckiest Girl Alive, but
Yeah, the
um
reception is clearly different. This
yeah.
book, I hear people talk about this book with a lot of respect, and I
Mhm.
hadn't
Mhm.
seen that about
Yeah.
Luckiest Girl Alive, but
Yeah,
I
and I
don't know.
think Luckiest Girl Alive does have a little bit of lower ratings across the board on Goodreads and stuff like that, but still very interesting to see how those differ. And then as far as like talking about this book, how would you personally categorize this book? Because I know we mentioned how this was nominated at the Goodreads Choice Awards in the mystery thriller category, and I think if people read this thinking, oh, it's going to be like a mystery thriller, they might be a little bit like let down or disappointed just
Mhm.
because I don't think it's exactly that. But like how would you personally categorize this book? And then how did you feel about like the pacing? Like, did you ever find it to be kind of like slow or were you bored?
Mhm.
Um,
Um, I fo-
So,
I sorry.
no, go
Uh,
ahead.
I found the pacing to be a little bit slower, but I think it was slow in a good way. Like sometimes the pacing is slower in a bad way and you're just like
mhm.
never getting to it. I would categorize this personally, now that I've like sat down and thought about it, as more like historical fiction, to be honest.
Mm, okay.
That's
For a thriller specifically, it needs to be, for me anyway, when someone says this is a thriller, I have two expectations: fast-paced and twisty. And this
Hmm.
wasn't either one of those things. So I don't think I could call it a thriller.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. And I think I was going to say, yeah, I also probably would say historical fiction, not just because most of the book is told in the past, though
Hmm.
obviously that is a prereq of historical fiction, but I actually find it to be more of a norm in historical fiction to take real life events of history
Hmm.
and fictionalize them. And I feel like it's much more. accepted in the historical
Mm.
fiction genre, which is kind of interesting.
Uh-huh.
Which is kind of what this one did, and it has more of that controversy around it because it's more marketed as like true crime mystery thriller type book. And I also think the same kind of similar to what Elizabeth said of mystery thrillers typically intend to be entertaining, fun,
Right.
surprising, whatever. Whereas historical fiction that I read usually does have more of the like character study element to it of like, let's examine the morality of this event that happened or these people involved. And that's usually a little bit more digestible, um, in the historical fiction context. If usually there's
Right.
something deeper that it is exploring intentionally. And I feel like this did that more
Mhm.
than
I love that because I don't
mystery
have
thriller.
much experience reading historical fiction. And even
Yeah.
calling it that for this feels weird to me because
Yeah.
it's like this, what, 70s, right?
70.
50s,
Yeah.
70s? It doesn't seem like that long ago because when you
Mhm.
think of historical fiction, it's so vast. It's literally anything in the past. But people
Yeah.
are calling even like, what was the Riley Sager that was in the 90s?
And
Like that's
Yeah.
yeah.
historical fiction. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Like what?
and then this guy,
Technically. Yeah.
which
I
makes
mean,
me
anything before like 2010 is now historical, right?
I
Yeah.
mean, what's
It's
the what's
wild.
the what's the cutoff, you
I
know?
know. I
I
don't
don't know if there
know.
is one. Yeah,
I
but
don't
like
know.
I would say if you just said like 50 years ago, probably people would say, yeah,
Mhm.
that qualifies. But then when you put the year on it, people have more of a recent connotation, I think, with
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
70s and more recent.
Yeah.
But yeah, so from that perspective, I found the pacing also to be good because I feel
Mhm.
like it took the time that it needed to
Mhm.
Right.
really examine the characters and the event, what was going on. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
I liked the pacing.
Yeah, I would agree. That's really interesting that you both said historical fiction because I personally was thinking more like I was like, oh, I would just categorize this as like literary suspense or like literary kind of mystery, like because I did find it so similar to like Notes on an Execution, and usually people also describe that book as kind of like literary
Yeah.
suspense and like that kind of thing. But yeah, like that's a good point that the historical aspect is a huge, part of this, and then also yeah, like the crime fiction. I
Yeah.
didn't even think that yeah, because since it
Mhm.
is really based off a true, true crime story in a way. I think that would be pretty accurate also to call it crime fiction.
Yeah.
Um, so that is pretty interesting. And then before we do jump into spoilers, I just wanted to talk about, how do you feel in general about books like this that are kind of like inspired by true crime or real life events, and then they kind of write it in a fictional way? Like, do you usually find that to be like uncomfortable to read, knowing that this is kind of like a true story that's happened to real people, or how do you just in general like feel about those things?
Yeah, for me, so like I said, I don't really consume true crime. So I'm not super into that whole discourse about the
Hmm.
ethics of true crime. But if we're talking about like writing fiction in general, I think it's dangerous to ever say certain people can't write about
Hmm.
certain things. I think that veers into like censorship topics, which in
Right.
general I don't think is good. And
Mhm.
I also think that for events like this that are tragedies or whatever, I think it can be helpful to examine them even in
Right.
a fictional lens because I think the more we like expose um, negative situations or negative people or controversial topics, I think that better equips us to find solutions for them or to grapple with them in real life. So in
Hmm.
general, I feel like if it's handled with care, I don't see a problem with it. I can respect people who don't want to read it for themselves or don't want to recommend it themselves. I think that's fair for everyone to make their own decisions. But in general, for me, I feel like there shouldn't be a problem in writing it. And I do think there's a little bit of a responsibility for an author who's going to take that on to handle it with care. And I think
Hmm.
that this author did that. So I think it's a good thing.
Hmm.
I like that. That's a very mature way to look at it. And you are,
Yeah.
if no, you are mature, I feel like Jordan. Um I agree. I agree. And those are some really good points. Um I okay, so before I got into this, I think I saw Ashley in the chat a little bit ago, and my introduction really to this was her reading it, and I saw her one of her reading blogs where she read it, and so that was, and she talked a lot about the ethical issues with this, and I think it's just kind of convoluted, the discussion. It's not, it's not black and white.
Mhm.
So I went into it with that thinking kind of almost like on the defensive, I guess, on the part of Pamela, because from what I understand, from what I heard from Ashley, is that Pamela, the real life Pamela, is now considering writing her own memoir.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
So I just wish I had some kind of like quote from her that's like, hey, this is great, saying like,
Right.
Yeah.
using it so
Yeah.
that I could like feel okay about that. Cause that's the only thing. Cause this book it's about, it's about who's telling the story, right?
Mhm.
About taking that angle of the patriarchy, flipping it on its head, and then following these women and getting to know them in a true, fleshed out, flawed, real way.
Mhm.
And then saying like, this is my story, and owning that. And just the fact that that is like a theme of this, of like owning your own story and telling the stories of the people who have been silenced. Um,
Mhm.
just that makes me feel a little weird about the fact that like, okay, well, maybe Pamela, maybe Pamela wants to write her own story, and maybe, it's about her, and just trying to put myself in her position and thinking like how this could have affected her, even though, like you said, it's so tastefully done and so like carefully handled. Um,
Mhm.
it's almost like, it's just like, is that a little bit hypocritical to be touting, sharing your own story while still telling someone else's story? I don't know, and I'm not
Mhm.
judging it on that either way, but it does give me that just slight discomfort, which is
Right.
why I lost that 0.5 stars, because I'm like, it's just an ethical conundrum for me. But the way you
Mhm.
say it, Jordan, that makes a whole lot of sense. And I absolutely agree with that as well. It's
Mhm.
just got me in my head a little bit about it, like going back and forth, which is why I'm just a little bit reticent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're right about it does matter who's telling the story. And I feel like
Mhm.
we also um like authors should be forthcoming with who they are to the story. And I know that there have been other books, like the one about the Slender Man killing. Like I don't know if
Mhm.
that book that was written about that situation ever actually said that that's what it was about, and so then
Yeah.
it wasn't even accepting like this is an examination of that. It was more about is it or isn't it, which kind of takes away
Mhm.
from the examining you could be doing about it. So I feel like even though this doesn't give the attention necessarily to Ted Bundy's name or to him being a charming person, I do still respect that, as far as I understand, like it is clearly about him. And it even
Mhm.
references like the adaptation with Zac Efron playing him.
Right.
So like it's
Right.
clearly about him,
Yeah.
but it
Mhm.
can be that and still try to denounce his actions, but then allows us to talk about it and not just spend all our time being like, is it, isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I'm being completely honest, that was the draw for me, was that
Mm,
this was about Ted Bundy. So are we
Mhm.
not still using that clout that comes with it to get attention for this story? And if
Right.
we're doing that, like, I don't know, does it make it okay because it
right.
is?
Is it a necessary evil? Is that a
Mhm.
necessary,
Yeah,
yeah, like
that's the
morally
thing.
gray area so that you do get to shine light on, yeah, the
Yeah,
victim?
Right.
I don't know.
it's definitely like taking back the spotlight. So if you're
Yeah.
using it in that context, does that make it okay? Is it
Mhm.
okay if it's for a good cause? But then who's determining what's a good cause and what's not? And it's just like so gray.
There's
I
a
love
lot of gray. Yeah.
love it.
Yeah, I like this, comment that Katie said. I feel like there's a difference between sensationalizing true crime and examining the societal impact of a crime and
Yeah.
how it was handled.
Oh,
I think
very
that's really, well said.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, I agree with like, I wonder why the author decided to do like half kind of fictional and half kind of
Yeah.
feeling more real. Yeah, like I wonder what the thought process was here because I do agree it might have been even more powerful if more of it was true. But then it's also like, are you the right person to tell this story? Like that's really, I think, what it comes down to. But I definitely agree with what both of you said, and I appreciate, I feel like you're both very well spoken, and I just really agree with what you had to say there. And I that's why I think this book is so powerful because it does give us so much to talk about. Like,
Yeah.
just 30 minutes in and we're still not even in the spoilers yet.
Yeah.
So I think from this point forward, we will be talking about some spoilers just because I really want to dive in and have enough time to do that. And there's so much that I would really like to talk about with this book. So if you have joined us, thank you so much for being here. We are going to be jumping into spoilers from this point forward. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to talk about is Well, let me see. I had a question about like, did you enjoy both perspectives that we were getting in this book, or did you feel like this book was like lacking because it had like, I guess my question would be like, would you have preferred if the book was told entirely from Pamela's point of view, or did you like that we got the second point of view with Ruth? And then how did you feel about each character? Or was there one that you connected with more or cared about more or anything like that?
Yeah.
How did y'all read this? Did you read it physically or audio?
I did both.
Me too. I did both.
Yeah.
Okay. I kind of did too, actually. I mean, I did mostly audio though.
Yeah. For me, I definitely preferred Pamela's storyline, especially like from the beginning, the very first scene where or I don't know if it's the first scene, but the sorority house scene where she's walking through, she's seeing what's happening, she's
Right.
responding. All of that was so engaging right away. So from then on, I was pretty much like hooked on Pamela. So I was less interested in Ruth. I still think her story was incredibly interesting. But I was pulled more towards Pamela's. I do think Ruth's story helped with Tina's engagement in the story. I think it gave her a little bit of credibility that we also got Ruth and Tina's storyline, so that when Tina came into Pamela's, like we trusted that she was as close to Ruth as she said, all of that. So I can understand why it was there, but I definitely loved Pamela's story more than Ruth's.
To be honest, like, okay, so first off, same, like, started off, like, really into Pamela. I loved how she was so type A, and I loved that she was just, like, a go-getter. And at first, I didn't like Ruth's perspective as much. But then I feel like we saw Ruth grow so much. Like, and she's just, like, we see her, like, being so insecure because of her acne and her ex-husband. And, you know, we are following her as she meets Martina. But I gotta say, for me, Martina is the hero of the story. She is the only character who is in all of the timelines.
Yeah.
And she is like the constant throughout this entire story.
Yeah.
As we follow her, as she meets Ruth in the grief group, and then she meets Pamela after we're in spoiler anyway. I don't know. I don't think it's a spoiler that Ruth was killed by Bundy, right? That's not a spoiler because we know at the beginning she's dead.
Yeah.
So basically the way it's set up, you have Ruth's timeline that starts out earlier, 1974, was it?
Yeah.
And she's meeting Martina, and we follow Ruth until her death. And then we start following Pamela in 1978 when we have the sorority house invasion, and we follow her to current day. So it's like starting all the way through. But then we don't get Ruth's death until the very end. I think the way she lined up these point of views in the timelines was so well done. I think it had so much poise, and the way it was told had such a great impact. Like by the time we got to Ruth's death, I was like choking up for Ruth. Like I did not want her to die. I felt even more for Martina because this is her partner that passed, that was killed. And I felt like Martina, I felt like she was like rogue. She was like that bitch. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Martina was like that bitch. Like she did not care. She was like on a quest to figure out what happened to her partner and her best friend, and her girlfriend. And she was just like not caring what anybody thought or what anybody had to say about it. So I really loved Martina because of that, or Tina. I will say though, in the audiobook, I was at times getting confused between Ruth and Pamela's point of views. I'm not sure. I looked into it a little bit, but I'm not really sure if they were the same narrator or not.
I know. I think there were two different narrators, but they did sound pretty similar.
But they sounded very similar. Yeah, it wasn't distinct enough for me to not have to continually reference. And I would get caught up and be like, oh, wait, but who am I listening to? And then have to connect all the pieces. That was the trickiest part. But I do think this author was at her best when she is just having these characters state bluntly and with no particular I want to say finesse, but like no like fleur-de-lis. It's not like super fancy and floral and pretty.
Yeah.
Like, it's very straightforward, just them saying how ridiculous this situation they're in is, how they have so blatantly been ignored, how they have so blatantly been ostracized and belittled. And those are the moments when this was at its strongest, because you're really just seeing it just in black and white there, like spelled out, like, hey, this is what happened. And from our perspective, we're like, that's not right.
Yeah.
But we're also drawing parallels to things that are similar still to this day.
Yeah. And I thought it was very cool and interesting and kind of meta that we got Pamela's perspective in the past and in like 2021 present day or whatever year it was, because she was also drawing those parallels herself. And I really liked whenever it would reference like her in the past went through this thing, was having these feelings about it. And she was like, I didn't even realize at that time how sensationalized this was being, or whatever we now understand about what was happening. But like because she grew up and we got both perspectives, also came to the same conclusions. And I thought that was so interesting. And I really liked getting her in both of those timelines. I thought helped add to that too, because she was able to call out things that had happened in her lifetime after she went through this event, and how that either changed her perception or strengthened like her convictions over what was happening.
Yeah, things that are only obvious in retrospect, since we had that time to like sit back and reflect on her whole life and say like, oh, I didn't realize this cultural impact, or this, things that you don't know in the moment and you only recognize are like big deals when you're looking back at it.
I know. I loved how the book started off with the scene with Pamela with like in the sorority. I thought it was like a really gripping scene to open with. And I was like, holy crap. Like it was already like so intense from that first scene. And I personally loved the like setup of like, how we were saying how the story starts with Pamela, and then how once Tina connects into the story, then that's how we kind of get thrown back into like Ruth's perspective years later. And I loved the dual point of view. I loved going back and forth between Ruth and Pamela. And Pamela, I just immediately felt connected to her. Like those scenes where she was trying to get a hold of her parents and like she just couldn't, and she was just like, where were you, like, dude, broke my heart. Like I was crying. And then the scenes where she like has to call the victim's parents and like, dude,
that was
the audiobook
so
too.
hard.
I was like, it was brutal to listen to, and it made it feel so real. And I just immediately connected with those characters. And then like we were saying with Ruth's storyline, I wasn't expecting Ruth to have like a queer storyline, which really just like hit me so hard. Like her, her having to deal with like the homophobia from her mom and her family, and like the way that they treated her and Tina, and like going as far to say that she needed to like go to a mental hospital or something because she was experiencing feelings for a woman. It was way more than I was expecting with this. And I was like, wow, like the queer storyline just really got to me too emotionally. And I also wasn't expecting with Ruth's perspective to like actually get the scene of her like meeting this man on the beach and like actually seeing that all played out. Like, oh my god, it was so tough, because it's like, because by that point in the book you're so connected, like you've been following this character for so long. And I just thought the way that she went about telling the story, I just thought it was so well done, because it was so powerful to have that like last scene with Ruth, and just to to get that closure, I guess, in a way with her character. But like, oh, it was awful. It was awful.
Yeah. And that's so hard, because that's the part we don't ever get. Like those victims aren't able to share their story of what actually happened in their final moments, which is so sad. But I agree, like her whole life, she went through so much. And like, I know we can all conceptually understand, like these victims are whole human beings. They had lives, they had futures ahead of them. Also the parts where they talked about, where Pamela was talking about Denise's like plans she was making for the future and all that, like that makes it more heartbreaking when you are in their head and you see it through their eyes, like their life and everything they've gone through, just to be taken away from them like that is the saddest thing.
Right.
Yeah, Denise was a really big part of this story too, even though she died at the very beginning. Like, I feel like I got to know Denise as well.
Agreed.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite quotes, and I don't know if you guys had any quotes that you wanted to like pull from this that you just loved, but one of my favorites was on page 81. It was like one of the first scenes where they were really talking about it. And she said, law enforcement would rather we remember a dull man as brilliant than take a good hard look at the role they played in this absolute sideshow. I'm sick to death of watching them in their press shirts and cowboy boots and their comfortable leather interview chairs and hugely successful and critically acclaimed crime documentaries talking about the intelligence and charm and willingness of an ordinary misogynist. This story is not that, and the story is not that. And I just really appreciated like that quote. right from the jump, because I was like, wow, like, thank you. Like, this is not the story about him. Like, you are highlighting the women, and you are showing how how incompetent the police were in this whole situation, and how, like, to make themselves look like they just didn't know like how harmful he actually was, or like, it was just a lot. It was never about Ted Bundy being a mastermind. It was always about the police just screwing up and thinking he was harmless when he wasn't. So
Yeah, I love how directly this book just like
yeah,
continually said, like, he's not a clever guy. He's
yeah,
not a mastermind.
exactly,
Like, yes,
exactly.
like people are painting their own picture of him to support that
Hmm.
narrative, but like take 1 second to think about it in the
Yeah,
alternative, and it's clear that he wasn't, and it does harm to
yeah,
paint him in that light.
Mhm.
exactly.
I highlighted so much of this book. Like, I didn't
Yeah.
write down any favorite quotes, but there are so many moments that were just gut
Mhm.
punches.
I highlighted a good amount too. I'm trying to I'm trying
I
to
know. I'm like,
I know.
I tried to make a different tab color for the ones I wanted to read like during this live show, and I'm
Oh,
getting them all
nice.
mixed up. One of them too was a good one, was on page 161, when she said, sometimes I think the defendant is just another old wives' tale, that law enforcement backed up his self-purported claims of brilliance to cover up their own incompetence in interviews they gave the media and testimonies they made before the judge, and it all cemented from there, hardening into a generational truth passed down from mother to daughter. Consider this my own warning. The man was no diabolical genius. He was your run-of-the-mill incel who I caught picking his nose in the courtroom more than once. I just love that.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think
um
I highlighted like pages, so I probably shouldn't
I know. It's too
Yeah.
much to pull. Yeah, I
entire.
wish I would have pulled out maybe a couple, but there's so many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just shocked that like at the end of this book we actually did get the actual quote from the judge, like the actual thing that he said to him. And like we talked about at the beginning, like I was just like, I knew the case of Ted Bundy and I'd seen a lot of stuff about this before, but I'm still shocked to this day the way the judge spoke to him in the courtroom. And it's just the language of like the friendliness of his tone, and the like, I have no animosity towards you, partner, and like, you're a bright young man. It's really like disgusting and awful to think about the way that not only like the judge, but like that's just how society in general was talking about him. Like even in the news they would just be like, oh, look at him in his bright blue suit, just like with sparkly eyes, and he's so charming in the courtroom. And like just the way that the media and like everyone at the time was
Mhm.
talking about him, it's just horrific to look back
Yeah.
on. Like, just completely shocking to me that that would be something that actually happened. And I think that's why this was so hard hitting for me, because I feel like this author did such a great job with pointing out how fucking weird that is and how we should not be doing this.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was interesting, as well as that just reminded me of the other several moments that she called out other men whenever they would say something like, give me 20 minutes in a room with him or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
And then she
yeah,
kept
yeah,
calling that out as like, why are men
yeah,
saying that? Like,
yeah,
that's not helpful. Like,
yeah.
help
It's not.
me, help the
Yeah,
women that like are actually asking for help, and we have tangible things you can do. Like, just
yeah,
expressing your manliness and your toughness and saying that you could beat him up is
yeah.
not helpful.
Not
Why is
helpful.
that the script that all of them said?
And
Mm-hmm.
meanwhile, like this whole sorority house has nowhere to sleep tonight, and
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
they
exactly.
they need resources, and they're being denied by
Yeah.
like the groups that they're reaching out to, and then other people are just over here like, yeah, I'll kick his ass.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
cool.
also I also thought too, the whole situation with Roger, being Denise's boyfriend, and how she like thought for a split second that it was him at the beginning and then quickly realized it wasn't, but because she mentioned his name to the police just really aggressively wanted to pursue this man. And like, I just thought that was such an interesting storyline of how he literally, like, wasn't there that scene where he like abducted her in his car and was like driving drunk and being really sketchy, but she almost didn't want to report it to the police because it would just give them more of a motive to like go after him, when she's like, he's not the one. And the way she would even show the flyer of the picture of like Ted Bundy or the defendant or whatever to the cops, and they would be like, no, we're still going to pursue this guy, Roger. It's like, it's really
Yeah.
just showing that once the police have like a narrative or something that makes sense to them in their head, like they're just going to gun for that, even if it's not the truth. And like
Mhm.
how
Yeah, that
harmful
was
that is.
fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah, there
reminds me of, if y'all don't mind, a personal like thing that I went through when I was like, I was like, I don't know, 5 or 6, 7 years ago, something like that. And I got into a really bad car wreck. This guy came up behind me, and literally, like, I was like alone on the freeway, and he just came at me at like 100 miles an hour and hit me from behind.
What?
And my car spun out, and luckily there was no other traffic, so I didn't hit anybody, and I was safe, and totaled my car. But like, I pulled off to the side, and I never saw this man. I never got to see who he was or anything. The police came to ask me what happened, and I told them what happened, but I was hysterical. Like, I was crying. I could barely get like words out of my mouth. And when they filed the police report, I was so floored because they said it was both of our faults. And I
Oh
don't
my
know
God.
what this man told him. I don't know what this man told him. I know what I experienced, and I know I was not at fault at all. And
No.
it just makes me think that, like, because I was so hysterical, and I admit that I was, because I have never experienced anything like that before. He didn't
Yeah.
take anything I was saying seriously.
Oh
And
my
he
God.
believed
Wow.
this guy, whatever he said, that I like pulled over in front of him or something. Like, he said some bullshit. And like, it's situations like that where I'm like, how do you, in that situation, when everything is so like high stakes, you're hyped up, and everything is like feels like it's in fast motion,
Mm-hmm.
how do you convey yourself and communicate that to someone like a police officer
Yeah.
in a way that they're not going to take it, that they're going to believe you, number
Yeah.
one, and that they're not going to like think, oh, she's just being hysterical, So
Wow.
I felt that for them in this situation. I really felt that for them.
That is
That's
so
awful.
terrible. I'm sorry to hear that. That's
Yeah,
awful.
well, and that only further emphasizes, like you said, how Tina
Mhm.
is the hero of this story, because without her relentlessly pursuing this guy that she knew
Yeah.
was him, like
Mhm.
Pamela never would have been able to get any traction, because
Mhm.
she had the picture, like you said, she knew exactly who it was, and the police still wouldn't listen to her, and she had to
Yeah.
continue pursuing it. But like
Mhm.
without Tina, it just doesn't go anywhere. It's only
Yeah.
Roger.
Mhm.
Yep.
Oh,
It takes
yeah.
those women who are going to push through, who are going to keep going, no matter how many times they get turned down, no matter who laughs in their face, and just continue to make their point until somebody hears them.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's what it is like being a woman in this society in general,
Yeah.
And that
Yep.
also reminds me of the other woman that helped Pamela, the sorority, what's it called? The woman who was in the sorority, and she did house the girls
Yeah.
after it happened, and then later she was the one who wrote Pamela the letter
Right.
um about the Carl stuff,
Right.
right? Like she also played a big part in helping Pamela out with this, and it just again goes to show like how you can provide tangible help to people in a situation like this by like taking people in, listening to their story, and trusting what they're telling you
Right.
goes a long way
Mhm.
in getting the right thing done.
Yeah. Yeah, Carl's whole, storyline in here too just, like, oh my god, irked me so bad.
That kind of nearly lost me at the end. I was like, "Okay, I
Yeah.
can't handle another, like,
Like, another
subplot."
man. Like, what is going on? Like, oh my
Yeah,
god.
it was kind of
Like,
a
he's a
lot.
I thought
traitor.
like Pamela and Carl were gonna have like a love connection at the beginning.
Mhm.
She was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, he's
Yeah.
so cool. He's this like reporter," and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, Carl like turned to the dark side. I'm like,
Yeah.
"What happened?"
Well, and she had a quote that was like, Carl wrote about Denise like she was an actual human or something like that, and she was like, "And that's why I trusted him." So then I
Mhm.
had Carl marked off as, like, a good guy. Like, he was gonna be the one guy that
Right.
Pamela had on her side, and then, yeah, it totally got turned on its head.
No, freaking Carl.
Carl.
Um, yeah, I think, I'm trying to think of anything else that I had. I know for me, I really loved the way that this book ended. I feel like it ended on a really emotional note because, one of the last scenes in this book is, Tina and Pamela, right? They're, like, looking through the woods trying to find, Ruth's
Ruth's
remains
body.
is, like,
Mhm.
yeah, like,
The
how the
remains, yeah.
story ends, and when that final line just said, "We can be found brighter than before," I was like, "No." Like, that line ended me. I was like,
Yeah.
"No." And I just thought that was really powerful and really beautiful, and I personally loved the way this ended, but I guess I did wanna ask, like, did you have any predictions for where this story was ending, or because it was based off, like, a true event, like, did you see it going in any other direction, or how did you feel about the ending in general?
Yeah, I didn't really have any expectation or guesses, also because it's clear from the beginning like what's going to happen. It's history. Like
Right. Yeah.
we know what happened. So I was curious to see what was chosen as the ending point,
Mhm.
because it is something that like yes, they got their closure, and yes, they were looking for Ruth's remains, which would have been like a closure of sorts.
Mhm.
But as we know, like it's not the end of situations happening like this, or it's not
Right.
the end of terrible bright young men doing terrible things to bright young women or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a hopeful, heartwarming piece of closure, but also I was left with that lingering, like, we still have
Right.
more work to do, or we still, we need to listen to more women because this is going to keep happening.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I did like the ending though.
Yeah, I totally agree. I loved the ending. I thought it was sad. I didn't cry, but I did think it was sad and also beautiful at the same time, with the whole connection to Ruth's body and was it a fern that
Yeah.
they were
Yeah.
planting, and that when it comes in contact with human biology,
Yeah.
Matter. Yeah.
Yeah.
it makes it bloom red instead of green.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a really beautiful, like, cyclical, like, circle of life type of theme there, that was really nice. That was like, even though this ended, like, something new is coming from this, and it ended on a hopeful note, which I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate.
Yeah, I would agree with Lily that it was like hopeful but realistic still, in the end, which I really enjoyed too.
Yeah.
Um,
And I kind of liked, so that fern thing, I don't know if that's true or if that's used, or I have no idea,
yeah.
but I do also kind of like that, just in the spirit of like knowing better as we advance, as we
Mm-hmm.
grow as humans, as we learn more people's stories, and also as science and technology advances, like hopefully we have more tools going forward so that we can solve things better. And I kind of also liked that also
Mm-hmm.
had an element of like, we're all in this together. If we can just keep working towards what we can control, hopefully we can use it for good in the
Right.
future. I think that's kind of a cool message, if that's true, if anything like
Yeah.
that exists.
Yeah.
I think that was interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'm
That
so
woman,
glad.
and she's like, it's fiction.
Yeah.
Like, that's
Okay, but somebody work on that, could you?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. Yeah, I definitely hope that if you were uncertain or if you're still here and you haven't read it, I hope that we have convinced you in some way to check this one out since we all enjoyed it so much. And before we do wrap up, I just wanted to know if there are any, like movie, TV shows, other books, anything that you would compare this to for like if you enjoyed this book, maybe you can check out this other thing because I know this one's inspired by like the Ted Bundy's case and all that, but is there any books that give you kind of like a similar vibe, whether they're like plots or feelings or anything like that?
Yeah. I
That you can
pulled
recommend.
some. So you
But
already mentioned Notes on an Execution, which
Mhm.
I did not enjoy as much as this one, but
Mhm.
a lot of people really loved this book. It similarly explores a serial killer through the lens of the women in his life. So I
Yes.
think that's an interesting theme if you want to
Mhm.
explore that specifically more. Then I have some other ones veering off a little because, again, this is not really my genre of choice. I don't have many other recs. The
Yeah.
closest one I can think of is The Female of the
Oh,
Species by Mindy McGinnis,
that's
which
solid.
is a
Yeah.
young adult, like a very gritty contemporary book,
hmm,
about a girl who lost her sister and she's going after the man that she thinks killed her.
Yeah.
So it's similarly like feminist,
Feminist, yeah.
pro girls.
That's
So
such a
I
good
remember enjoying this
recommendation.
one.
Yeah, I
I
haven't read
remember
that book in
enjoying this
years,
one.
but I
I
like that one a
know, me
lot too when I
neither.
read
It's
it.
been many years, but I
Yeah.
would recommend it if that sounds good. And then I'll give a pitch. It's a little out of left field, but speaking of how this is, in my opinion, more historical fiction, if
Mhm.
anybody's looking for more pro female historical fiction, these are two of my favorites.
Ooh,
So Take
okay.
My Hand by Dolan Perkins Valdez is about like bodily autonomy and fighting against people who are trying to take that away in history. Talks about like Roe v. Wade, things like that,
Mhm.
ooh, that's good.
which is particularly interesting now, even more so than when that book was published.
Right.
But and then The House of Eve by Sadiqa Johnson is historical fiction that covers like infertility, so more like women's issues that we need to bring more attention to. So like
Okay, yeah.
they're very different. They're not the
Yeah.
same, but
I
they gave
appreciate
me similar like ways of thinking after I
yeah.
read them. So I would
I
recommend them.
I could use more, historical fiction recs, so I appreciate it.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, historical fiction for me is like a genre that, like, if you tell me a book is historical fiction, I'm turned off immediately.
Mhm.
No offense, Jordan,
No.
but
Yeah.
I am. But then it's also one of those genres where I'll find certain books that happen to be that I'm interested in for other reasons and
Yeah.
really enjoy them. So
I
I
agree.
don't know why I'm biased.
Yeah, no, it's not an uncommon
That sounds really
thought
good.
to have, but I do enjoy historical fiction, so
Yeah.
I definitely have lots of recs.
Awesome.
Sweet.
I have a couple. There's some great in the comments too that
I
a
was
lot
gonna
of people
say
like.
Mhm.
that's
Um,
great. Yeah,
My name
Yep.
is Michelle Miller is an amazing.
that one's a nonfiction
I
too,
gave
so
it
that
5
one's
stars.
super powerful.
The Quiet Tenant is another one that you can kind of compare to Notes on an Execution. I would say Notes on an Execution is more literary than
Mm-hmm.
both The Quiet Tenant and Bright Young Women.
Mm-hmm.
But still very effective. But the two that I had been thinking of was, first of all, my favorite Gillian Flynn, Dark Places. And this one does the true crime thing, but it's completely fictional. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought, like, if somebody's looking for something like this, but without that kind of weird ethical gray area, then this would be something that's
Mm-hmm.
really cool because we're following, what is her name? Libby Day. And her entire family was murdered. And one night, I think in like the 80s, and in current day, she's 30 years old or something the like. And she's broke and she's traumatized from this experience. And there is a true crime like group that is seeking her out to solve the story because her brother was sent to prison for the crimes. But this particular group of true crime nerds don't think that he was responsible. And so they hire her to look into it. And this is my favorite Gillian Flynn. And I think it's amazing. And I love, if you like a kind of unlikable main character, then I think you'll like this. If that bothers you, then don't even go for it because you won't like Libby.
Nice. I know. I still need to read that one. It's like the
I
only
forgot
one by
about
that
that
author I
one.
haven't read.
Oh my God, it's my favorite. You
I
need
know.
to. Oh my gosh,
I
Gab,
need to.
you need
I
to.
need to.
The real question, though, is where has she been?
I
Can she write some
know.
more books, please?
I know.
Well, she works in TV and
Yeah.
she does like writing, I think for
She has a
TV.
book publishing company now too.
And what's that?
She has like a book publishing company. Like that book, One of These Good Guys, or One of the Good Guys that just
She's
came out, is
good.
published by her. Yeah.
She's not just sitting down; she's doing
Yeah.
stuff. But I
She's
need her.
Fine.
I
But
need her
can we also get a new novel?
Yeah,
Yeah.
can we please? And then the other book that I thought of was Paul Tremblay, A Head Full of Ghosts.
Oh.
Because that one, again, that one's more paranormal and potentially like a possession type story, but it also has to do, but it's all completely fictional and it's following this family who, again, in the past, they hired somebody to do an exorcism on their child, and they made a TV show about it, which like sensationalized it. And then we're following the character that survived years later as she kind of breaks that apart too. And I thought that that was kind of a parallel idea, and also not based on real life, so it doesn't have that little ethical dilemma there.
Yeah, both very interesting recommendations. I love that. One of the ones I wanted to mention was actually mentioned on because on Instagram I usually ask for people of like similar recommendations, and somebody mentioned I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which is like a true crime nonfiction book that was about, I think that one's about the Golden State Killer, if I'm remembering correctly. It's been a few years since I read that one, but I would agree that it does feel similar in the sense that it's like a true crime that takes place, that was like real story, and this one was actually like real. Or it's like nonfiction, so like the whole thing's real. But I thought that one was like a really well done, interesting true crime book that I've read. And then the movie that I would compare this to would be Promising Young Woman. That one is a movie that's it stars Carey Mulligan, and it's about how she goes out to like nightclubs or like these bars, and she pretends to be like overly intoxicated to see if a man will take advantage of her, and then if he does, then she like snaps right out of it. She's like, you got him. And she's like I can't remember if she's actually a serial killer, if she like kills men or, you know, that kind of thing. But that's kind of like her thing, is that she takes down these men who take advantage of women in nightclubs and stuff. And it was a really good movie, like really solid, highly recommend.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
very interesting.
So I think it would definitely be comparable to this, just in terms of feminism and, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah. I think, did you have anything else we forgot to touch on before we wrap up this live show, or did we hit everything you wanted to talk about?
Oh man, there's so much.
I know there's like so much, but
I feel like we could be here for like 4 hours just like
yeah, we could just go page by page and be like, and that and
how
that.
did you feel about this line?
Yeah. Like, one thing that I thought was poignant was when we discover Pamela's childhood trauma, where her mom tells her that she was lost for 4 days and nobody knows what happened to her.
Right.
And how that kind of may have created the person she is today, how she's so type A, and like she's like, oh, I don't have any trauma, but then like she doesn't even know what she went through. And so it's also touching on these themes of trauma as well, and how we carry that with us and how we move on from that, and those kind of ideas, which I liked as well.
Yeah. I know. I totally forgot about that plot point, but I feel like that was kind of thrown in at the end and I was like, wait, what? Like, how scary.
Well, and how like unsettling and unresolved. Like, what do you mean? Like, you have no more information? Like, he
like,
was
what happened to her?
Like, we don't know what happened to me? Like, how unsettling that would be. And she was like, on the 3rd day, I had given up hope. Like, I figured you were gone. And I was like, oh my gosh. Then, like, how can you just say that? Like, don't send me into a motherhood existential crisis like that.
Yeah.
And then her mom never really like connected with her. So it's like she couldn't stand the idea of potentially going through that again. And so she detached for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
Detached. Like, no, I can't handle it if something happens to you. So now we have this wall between us that's just going to be there forever.
Yeah, that's its own like full tragedy.
I found their relationship to be so hard to read about because of that. Like the way she was just so clearly like yearning for that like mother figure, you know, and especially when she was going through all this stuff and just being like, where were you? Like, I need you. Like, it's so sad that she never felt like really loved by her
both
parents.
Both of the mother-daughter relationships were very interesting between Pamela and her mom, and then also Ruth and her mom, and the grief. I thought also the what did they call it? Complicated grief, or what was, I don't remember the terminology. Complex grief. I thought that was a really interesting concept that I had never really thought of or seen featured, but that could totally be something that I could find myself exploring further down the road, of like stories of people who have complex grief and are grieving somebody that wasn't all good, or that they had, whether it was like long-standing or even a more recent conflict with, that makes their grief that much more difficult. I thought that was a really, really interesting topic in the book too.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting thought. I think that wouldn't have been possible though, because she was young. Like, she was really young when that happened, and I don't think it would have been.
Yeah, I didn't get that, but I don't know.
That's an interesting thought though. I think that would have been,
that would be insane.
Yeah, Tina's
relationship with her husband. Tina's from Texas. I live in Texas. I get it. Like, I'm from Michigan, but I get that. And they basically like sold her to this creepy old man when she was 11 years old.
I know, that was disgusting. I wrote, when that book came, or when that part of the book came in, I was just like writing like, ew.
Yeah, like, what?
Ew.
No.
Ew.
No. And then also,
like, parents were like, look, you'll be comfortable, you'll have a good life, you won't have to worry about the stuff that we have to worry about. And I get that, but also like, what about, like, how can she consent to that when she's that young and it's not her choice? She shouldn't have been put in that position.
No. Well, and the whole story with like Ruth, how she, what was her name? Rebecca was like her best friend that she had when she was younger. And then she got like romantically involved with her, but then Rebecca was like dating her brother. And the way the whole family like reacted to that situation, including Rebecca, no, disgusting. I hated that. And like, it was so hard to read that because it's like, they just assumed that Ruth ran away. And that's why it's like, they didn't even pursue like looking for her, right? Because they were so convinced that she like ran away, and they would rather believe that than like think that she was actually with a woman or something. Like, it was just so, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like those conversations with Rebecca, I was like, dude, can you not?
Wild.
I wonder if there is Aline says, I want Tina to write a memoir. I wonder if there is a real Tina.
I know. I thought somebody said earlier in the chat that her character was completely fiction.
Oh, okay.
I think I saw somebody say that. So, but
that is a tough part about the like sort of fictional stuff, is it's hard to know, because I don't necessarily want to go down that road and research it. Like, I don't really have the interest, but also I don't want to even get into that rabbit hole. So then,
Yeah.
it is a little bit unsatisfying or kind of weird to be like, okay, but what if
Yeah,
this
we could have used
is
an author's note at the
true?
end that was like, "This character is completely fiction,
Yeah.
but very much was needed for this reason in the story." I don't know, like
Yeah, and someone asked about like what research did she do? I agree.
yeah,
It would have been nice to get a little bit more of that after the fact to
yeah,
understand the
or an in
research she did
memoriam of,
do.
like, Ruth's real
Yeah.
life person or
Yeah,
something.
what is
Yeah,
paying homage to real people, but then which ones were made up by her? That would be nice to have.
yeah,
They
I
need
agree.
somebody to pick this book for their, like, dissertation or something and, like, go through and
yeah,
compare every single point.
yeah, sentence by sentence.
And get the bibliography.
If it's real life, if it really happened, if it didn't, I need someone to do that so I don't have to do that because
Yeah,
I
same.
really wanna know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much to everybody for joining us. I'm so glad that we started off this book club this year with such a banger. I'm really
Yay.
glad that I had a 5-star for this book club. It feels really good to have read something that just feels so profound and so moving. And so I'm glad that most of us seem to enjoy it. I know there was definitely some people in the comments who weren't a fan of this one, and that's okay too. I
Yeah.
love being able to have these conversations about this book. And yeah, thank you so much to both Jordyn and Elizabeth for joining me tonight. I really do appreciate it, and I think this was really fun for us to just get a chance to talk about the book and also like celebrate our January birthdays. And yeah, happy
Oh.
birthday to Jordyn tomorrow, like literally tomorrow.
Thank you. Thanks so
Yes,
much for having me. I
yes.
loved it.
Of course. But thank you so much to everybody who read along with us this month. I really do appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.